Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Monday and welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend. And to all you wonderful dads out there, I hope you had a wonderful Father's Day yesterday. Well, I hope it was Father's Day everywhere. It was Father's Day here, that's for sure. So I hope you guys all had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day. And yes, a new week, new beginnings, new everything. So let me just make a few little announcements here for the week. So we have Doug Mcintyre on now, which is wonderful, from Australia, but I'll give you more information on him now, also on the heterochromia and epigenetics. So super interesting show in store for us today. But before I bring Doug on, we want to just make announcements for the week. I actually did an interview with Danny Henderson last week sometime, so that'll be aired tonight, which is going to be 8 p.m. South African time. That's CAT, Central African time. So yeah, catch us there. I'll be in the chat, so I hope to see you there. And tomorrow, Tuesday, we have members book club with Leo Zagami. So please hit that join button and become a member of the Arrow Tribe and join our book clubs that we're going to be hosting, starting with Leo Zagami on Tuesday. So get a copy of his book on Amazon and read it, and then ask questions around the book. And he will obviously go into more detail around these things as well. And then also Double Trouble membership this week. On Friday, Samantha Plested, who's the transsexual woman that I interviewed, I think just over a week ago, she will be doing a Q&A for us on the show. So any questions around this whole transgenderism, transsexualism, transhumanism, whatever the heck we're dealing with right now, if you are going through something like that, if you're in the throes of going through it, if you're a parent, Samantha is amazing in terms of sharing freely, openly, rawly. So that's happening on Friday. But watch the schedule. The details will be on that as well. I do believe that is 6 p.m. Central African time. And yes, I think that's probably about all I wanted to say about the announcements. So you can just check up on last week as well. We did some great shows, especially with Jessie. Jessie coming up again on Wednesday, of course, for Double Trouble. So I look forward to seeing you guys there. And welcome everybody in the chats. I'm sure I've got a lot of Australians here today. Very happy to see you. But before I do, I just want to actually talk about Doug Mcintyre, sorry, just getting his little promo bio out here. Doug is from Australia. He joins us from Australia this morning. And he's born in the early 1960s in Sydney, Australia, in a very violent and sexually abusive household. Managing to survive many forms of abuse and threats upon his life by his own parents, Doug escaped home at 18 to create a life for himself. However, though he escaped the immediate threats, the effect of his traumatic childhood followed him, and it has been a lifelong journey to not only heal, but also recover the memories that were too painful to carry in his daily life. In his 30s, the journey of remembering the deeper, darker secrets of his family began, and overcoming decades, he had to face his fears and remember in order to heal himself mentally as well as physically. Now in his 60s, Doug continues to face his past, realizing his trauma has not only shaped him, but his courage to face it has made him much stronger. Absolutely, I'm going to agree with that right there. This isn't the story of a victim, but that of a warrior. Today, he speaks out against predators and fights for his abusers to be held to account and for the police and governments to do the right thing. Yay for that. Definitely need more. All of the heart warriors. So on that note, Doug Mcintyre of Australia, welcome. I'm so happy to see you again, Doug. How are you doing?
Thank you, Chantelle. Lovely to see you as well. It's been a while now, hasn't it? A couple of years, I think. Time goes quick.
Yes,
Yeah,
we did an interview. Yeah, we did an interview. I know it was at least 3 years ago on the
yeah,
focus on Australia. So very happy to have you back again. And also, I know speaking to Rachel Vaughan a couple of weeks back about the epigenetics, the ley lines and cryptids as well, but I know that's not what we're going to be talking about today. More the epigenetics, heterochromia, and trauma
yeah,
associated to that. But I think it's such an interesting journey because what you've recognized as well as a whole journey, you've done a lot of research on this over the past few years. So maybe you want to start with us again from the beginning. You know, I mean, your childhood, just from some of the stuff. And I'm sorry, I'm not laughing, but it's just the craziness of your story to me is absolutely unbelievable. What you
yeah.
went through in your family life with your parents who were just randomly just trying to kill each other. Just it was a normal act every
It
day.
wasn't
The
random.
one putting
It wasn't
glass in the other
random. It
one's
was,
food.
yeah, it was very intentional. They were, and I think this is uh, laying the groundwork for the epigenetics and things like that, and how trauma changes us, not just mentally but physically. But yeah, my parents were constantly trying to kill each other. My mother would crush up glass and put in my father's food, and my father would give her a bottle of sleeping tablets to take, and just said a sister and a mother found her that she got rushed to the hospital and had her stomach pumped, and he'd throw her through the window, and she'd hit him over the head with an iron bar, and while he was blind drunk, by mind you, and the next day he thought he'd been in a fight because he was incredibly violent. The police said he was the most violent man they'd ever met. Oh, it was just, if it wasn't so horrific, yeah, it's like a black comedy, growing up in that. And it was just horrific as a child. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. So it was, yeah,
I'm
two people
really sorry
who,
to be laughing.
no.
Really
When
sorry.
I first started healing, my friends would ask me what was wrong, and I'd tell them, and I'd start laughing about it because it's a way of, dealing with it. I think, it was just so bad. It was, yeah, sort of something that you'd
I
watch
mean,
on
it's
some
like
show.
exactly what you say, absolute black comedy, the blackest
Yeah.
of black comedy imaginable. But anyway, I mean, as I said, it's very inappropriate for me to be laughing, but the idea of anyone's parents just doing that, and that's just a normal day in your household, is absolutely unbelievable to me. But start from the beginning. I mean, are we talking about a typical satanic cult here, or are we just talking about parents who are hugely dysfunctional?
How could they be that dysfunctional and not be in a satanic cult? This was their
Right.
normal. And for them, it was all about them, totally about them. It was, as children, we were meant to be seen and not heard. We were not allowed to speak back, which means if we're told to do something, you do it immediately, and if you don't do it, then you're belted to within an inch of your life. My father used to pick me up by one hand as a little kid, and we were very malnourished because we were quite poor. He spent all his money on himself and his appearance, and we lived off, boxes from charities for food and clothes, garbage bags and things. But he'd pick me up like this because I was quite, I'd stand up to him and he would take his belt off and just whip me with his belt until I was screaming in agony, and then drop me on the ground and then order me to my room. And I wasn't allowed to cry either. So I have a lot of problems, feeling emotion in front of people all my life, because as a child, I would get the most brutal bashings or worse. and I wasn't allowed to express any emotion. I basically had to take it, and so he died last year, and I managed to see him briefly before I died, and got assaulted by my brother in the process. So he ended up with an AVO, and my mother's still alive, but still totally, plotting, scheming, all sorts of things. So, I'm still back at the police with death threats and so on and this and that. And, I mean, the fact that this is normal for me, I don't even blink at it. So, yeah, but it was so... I blocked a lot of it out. I'd always remembered a lot of the violence, and I'd been hit so many times. By the time I put myself through university, if a friend went to scratch their head like that, I'd instinctively duck, because my mother used to hit me across the head so often and so much. And I left home to survive. When I was in about 17, she turned to me one day, looked me straight in the eyes and just said to me, "I wish you were dead." And it was like, as a child, I mean, that really affected me. And then she said, "I want you out of the house." And I said, "Where am I meant to go?" She said, "I don't care." And so she wanted me on the streets, and then she hauled me off to a psychologist to have me classified as insane. And he spoke to her, then he spoke to me, and he called the two of us in, and he said, "Well, Mrs. Mcintyre, I've spoken to the two of you, and frankly, I really think you are the problem." So it was... that was amazing for me, that all of a sudden someone believed in me and heard my story. But she never got over that. She hardly talked to me for months after that. And I had to lie low, basically, to, at least have a roof over my head. But yeah, she's psychopathic, still is, So anyway, to them, they don't see any problem. A few years ago, and I'm estranged from her now. I don't want her or my siblings in my life. But she said to me a few years ago, "You don't know how guilty I feel for everything I've done to you." And I thought, wow, it's again all about her and all about the impact on her. There was never any consideration for or any apology or anything like that. So expanding that a bit more, that was the psychology of my parents, which tells you a lot about them. So my father sexually abused us from birth. All of us kids, he didn't have a problem with that.
When you say us, how many kids were you, and where did you fit into the family? Because was it just you that was being so badly abused, or was it all your siblings who were caught up in this?
All of us. There were four of us. My older brother was Rick. They killed him when he was 22. Then there was me. Then I have a younger brother who has physical disabilities, he told me once of all the horrific abuse he'd been through. And then my sister as well, she went through extensive abuse. My parents, my father had a 4-year affair with my mother's mother. My mother, according to my father, had an affair with his father. So the incest, I was raped repeatedly by my father. Yeah, it was a typical cult family. And this was the norm, And my father thought he was clever. He'd go down to the pub and he'd brag about sleeping with his mother-in-law, thinking that he was some amazing man, and people were horrified. So it was, yeah.
I'm
wasn't
horrified.
a normal family.
Oh my.
Oh my. But it was, and he didn't care, He was so detached from reality. So
wow.
Yeah, it is. You look at it and you just think, how could this sort of family exist? But they do. And so I remembered all the violence.
Can I just ask you? I mean, I just find it, looking at your siblings, because to me, it's also very interesting to look at these typical cult families. Where you mentioned your older brother Rick, who was killed at the age of 22. that they killed him, you said. When you say they, is that your parents? And what would the reason have been? Was it a sacrifice? Was he abused as well? Was he the sacrificial lamb for the family in that way?
Well, being the firstborn, it's quite likely it was a sacrifice. Rick and I were living at Bondi together. I was going to uni. We were getting on quite good, and he was quite supportive of me, which was the only person in my family who'd ever done that, and that was for that brief period. I went to uni. One day I was 20, got called down the office. The police were waiting for me, and they hauled me off to the morgue to identify his body. So that really shattered me. The police made out it was a motorcycle accident because he rode a motorcycle, or motorbike, I should say. But there were so many irregularities. My mother told me it was a young woman from London who was driving the car, and she went back to London the next day. And I'd always say to her, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. So in recent years, I went back to the police. I thought, I've got to find out what happened. They had destroyed all the records. Thankfully, the coroner had some records. It looked like it was a motor vehicle accident where a car had hit him, but the name of the driver was the same name as a famous film producer in America, and by the same name, basically, and he was speeding. When I looked into the skid marks, everything like that. He moved the car before the police got there. There were no witnesses, despite it being peak hour. The guy who hit him didn't make a statement till a month after the policeman had wrapped up his investigation. And so there were all these things that didn't add up. I went back to the police and asked them to reopen the case, and they refused to. My parents were divorced by that stage because of my father's violence. We had restraining orders and everything like that. So we decided to tell him that Rick had died. He came straight up to the house, barged in the house, sat in his usual chair. My mother got down on the floor and bowed down in front of him, and he said, you killed him, didn't you? And so that's about as far as I've got with it. But so how she was involved, there's still questions there. But I think my mother really loved Rick, and my mother really hated me. And I think part of the reason may have been being in a cult, that she realised that at some stage, Rick would have to go. That's basically the price to be in the cult. But rather than accepting responsibility for herself, I think because I was the second born, she probably blamed me for his death. The fact that once I was born, that he had to go. And so that was the psychology, yeah.
That is absolutely tragic. My question then to you would be, would Rick have known that he was going to be sacrificed at some point? Was that knowledge to him?
Well, we had a lot of stuff done to us. The abuse that was done to us was horrific. I probably won't go into details because it's so horrific. I remember going through things where I was brutally raped over and over again as a little child and forced disassociated. So I have dissociative identity disorder as a result, and huge issues with trauma and anxiety. And so when they do trauma to you at a level where it tries to block you remembering. And so in terms of Rick remembering, Rick had a lot of trauma issues as well. He went through a lot of sexual abuse. I remember when my father was having an affair with my mother's mother, a number of times they got Rick and I involved as little toddlers, and things like that. Another time my father took me to a satanic ritual and held my hand on a knife while a little girl was murdered, and then I was blamed for it, and I was at the age of 3. So, that came up when my daughter was born. That triggered that memory. I'd blocked that all that time, but I'd been programmed not to remember. So my family were also involved with MK Ultra. So Martin Orne, who was from the CIA, came to Sydney in 1960. He got involved with Sydney University and a number of the psychologists there. And Fiona Barnett and Rachel and other people have been abused by people in that circle. Sydney University at that stage was connected to St George Hospital in Cogra. And I lived in Cogra, and that was a hospital where I was born, and also the hospital where I underwent different experimentation. I had electroshock therapy. They used me in their experiments on how to make colour TV better or more for mind control than what black and white is. So I had a number of years where I would lie in bed. Yeah.
Color TV, how can you, I don't want to stop your flow here, because I think what you're saying is super important. So please don't lose your train of thought. But I want to try and understand how they used you for color TV. How did they do tests on you for color TV?
Television is, to me, it's tell live vision, and we watch the programs. So it's all in our face what's going on. They had black and white. Color wasn't released by then. One of the lead psychologists from Sydney University who studied hypnotism and mind control, Professor Peter Sheehan, and he wrote a number of papers all about mind control using television, color television. So as a child, I would remember every night lying in bed and having these patterns go over and over in my head for years from all the experiments that they would do. And I couldn't, I would lie there, and the moment I closed my eyes, I could see these grids of different colors, flashing different colors and things like that. So their memories I've always had and always remembered, but I'm now starting to get the research to back up, trying to understand what was done to me. And I'm currently undergoing therapy, to bring up the memories that I've blocked, which, they're coming as well, and they're quite horrific. But in terms of what they were doing, where they were flashing things, I'm still yet to recover stuff. But I do remember just the mind control and how these images were imprinted in my brain for years, and I couldn't get them out. And then they correlate with the actual papers that were written. This professor, psychologist, was the same age as my mother, and I'm born in the same suburb as my mother, and I'm pretty sure went to the same schools as my mother. And so there's all these parallels that, as I do the research, keeps coming up. And the hospital, we lived about 3 blocks from the hospital, 1 block from the hospital, St George Hospital. And then they started setting up a psychiatric unit there called Pacific House, and they're now scrubbed all that off the internet. I've been able to get copies of documents that had existed, but if you ask AI about it, it says it doesn't exist. And Sydney University was very involved with all the cults, with the satanic ritual abuse, with the mind control, with the CIA. And because the CIA was not meant to, operate on people in its own country, that's why it would come to places like Sydney. And so, St George Hospital's right near Sydney Airport. The CIA had their own airline, American Airlines and things like that. And then as we progress into the 1970s, the CIA set up a bank in Sydney called Nugan Hand Bank. And through that bank, they channeled billions of dollars in the drug trade from Southeast Asia, from the Shah of Iran, all sorts of things like that. And then one of the founders of the bank was suicided. And then the billions just went missing, and no one really, just got covered over, and no one really got charged. So this is one of those black op things that they operate around the world to get the funding for all their programs, so that they don't have to go to Congress for the money. So like in America, where they use the cocaine trade to fund all their black ops things, in Australia, it was a Nugan Hand Bank. So a lot of people went bankrupt as a result. But yeah, so it was all connected. Yeah.
Wow.
And
We got to do a show just on that. I mean, I'm sitting here,
yeah,
just the information that you are, there's so much there. I would love,
yeah,
to break that down more. But definitely, I would love to look into more of that in the future as well, because it's so interesting for me to see how everything connects, right?
yeah,
It's like, and Australia makes sense as well, because, I, the abuses that have occurred in Australia are particularly brutal. They're
yeah,
particularly brutal. And it makes a lot of sense when we're looking at the orphan trains and stuff, that went to Australia, and the experimentation that really those children that went to Australia were used for. So
yeah,
it seems, and of course, with the CIA not being asking for the CIA not allowing, not doing experiments on their own people in their own country. So then they just mosey on off to Australia,
yeah,
where they've got all these orphan kids who are now not kids anymore, right? And doing these horrific things. It is unbelievable to me that and it's done so openly there. I wouldn't say openly, but it's like done on a large scale, Doug. Do you agree with that?
Oh, totally. And when you look at what other survivors have said, like if you think of Cogra was a hotbed for hypnotism, and they had, people coming there, involved with Sydney Uni, who was a leader in hypnotism and mind control in the world. We had Sydney Airport, which was a base for the CIA, the intelligence agencies. A lot of them had their offices in Cogra. Then you've got Lucas Heights, which is a nuclear reactor where they did a lot of things. So that's on another side. You've got Sutherland, where they did satanic rituals on another suburb near there. You've got Holsworthy Army Base. So all these things were within cooee of each other. So basically from Sydney, you go on the southern side of Sydney, and within half an hour, you've got all these different places where a lot of survivors have, spoken up and talked about, being at one or the other. And a lot of murders. The Royal National Park had a lot of murders. My father committed a lot of murders. And I started getting breakthroughs because I couldn't find much on my family. But then when I looked at who my father was associated with, and his best mate was from the Warren family, and then you find out that quite a lot of the CIA agents in Sydney came from the Warren family, and they all had these huge mansions overlooking Sydney Harbour. So it pays to be in intelligence. And then you start looking at the connections and the businesses and everything like that, and it starts to paint a picture that, the intelligence agencies get in there, they're, given these incredible lifestyles, but they do the most horrific things to people. I remember some of the experiments I went through, a middle-aged man and woman who were doing them to me. They just did them like it was just another day at work, you know. And I would be fighting and fighting against what they're doing to me, and they would just drug me into compliance and then just keep doing it and keep doing it until they broke me down as much as they thought they could. And we hear about this all over the world. There's Tavistock in the UK. You've got the Dr. Cameron in Canada. You've got the other stuff in America. And I'm sure, in other places there's things as well. But they're desperate to learn how to mind control people. And that's, if we bring it back to the epigenetics and the heterochromia, these are all things that trauma affects. And so they're fascinated. I mean, look at all the movies that we watch, X-Men and, all these cyborgs and transhumanism and all this thing. They want to, have this master race sort of thing, but they're fascinated, totally fascinated with experimentation. And my younger brother went through a lot. I have a lot of congenital birth defects that are typical of incest and things like that as well. But they're fascinated in, how they can alter the human genome to direct it in a way that keeps them in control. And they also all, believe they're descended of gods, and we're all just the cockroaches that aren't.
Exactly. Explain to us heterochromia. We have spoken to Rachel about that as well, as I said on one of our previous shows. But I would like to hear from you how you got into that. What made you realize and see the connection between trauma, epigenetics, and heterochromia? Maybe you can explain that to our viewers as well. Maybe just explain what each of those are.
Okay. Well, how I got involved in it was I went to an iridologist in my 30s. An iridologist said to me, I had dark brown eyes, and he said, because everyone would comment on my big brown eyes when I was younger. And he said, that's not your natural eye color. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you've got a lot of toxins in your system and that's not your natural eye color. What I didn't realize at the time, because I was into bodybuilding, I was doing modeling, I was having a very, very healthy lifestyle, but I was constantly getting sick. I was, dying, I was internally hemorrhaging, all these sorts of things. And my mother had been poisoning me. So she'd been coming into my house and doing things. And in recent years, when we've had to go to the place where she's been doing that, and sometimes she's done it openly, one day. Still.
Are you sorry? We're not talking about the poisoning that ended once you left home. Is she still continuing, or was she still continuing?
Yeah, she was still continuing. I didn't realize at the time that's what was happening. Then I had an issue. I used to, look after her, go and help her if she was ill and that, and she would feign, that, she, was helping me, but she wouldn't. It was always, pretense. But she said to me one day, oh, there's a cup of apple juice on the bench for you. And I went and took a mouthful of it, and it was disinfectant. And she thought that was hilarious. I spat it all out, thankfully. Another time she came to me and I had a jug of maple syrup, and she said to me, oh, I really love maple syrup. Can you get me a jug too? So I bought her a jug, unbeknown that she was taking her jug home that I bought her, lacing it with chemicals, coming around my place and swapping the bottles over. And I started getting really, really sick and not knowing why. Again, I hadn't tweaked, but then about 4 or 5 years ago, I started getting really sick again. And then, it was the honey. And I thought maybe I've got diabetes. And anyway, my housemate and I, we went away. And when we went away, he got sick as well. All of a sudden, we both started getting better. And I thought, this is interesting. So I went and tried some honey and no reaction, had more. Had heaps of honey, had no reaction. By the time we were away for 3.5 weeks, by the time we came back, all of our symptoms had disappeared. So I went into the kitchen, pulled the honey out and smelt it, and I almost passed out. And so she'd been poisoning the honey. So I went to the police. I've been to the police plenty of times, and they've protected my parents, and they refused to do anything. They should have established a crime scene. I said, can you tell me where I can send the honey off to get it tested? Oh, no, we don't know anywhere. So, now that we've realized it, it's reported to the police, we've got cameras up, we've had to put things up, secure, locks on everything, it's, that's just my life. I can't join clubs because I can't have a regular pattern of behavior. I work from home, so that's good. So it's just this ongoing thing. 2 months ago, I got a message sent to my phone. It was 5 minutes of gunshots. So the police, 2 months later, still haven't told me who the person was who sent that to me. I realized that they'd sent previous messages. One is someone basically in the death rattles, and another one talking about a very specific heart condition I have, and they were all sent on significant dates, 2 of them on anniversaries. So one with the gunshots was sent on the 44th anniversary of my brother's death. So when Rick died, he died 22. Yeah.
Yeah,
and
I
it
was
was
going
a
to say
month.
that's
It was all fours because 4 is the gematria for kill. So everything has to follow their little system where they think it's auspicious that now it's the 44th year since his death that they're going to have much greater chance of killing me. This is how they think.
Do you think your mom is still involved?
Totally, 100%. She practices witchcraft on a regular basis. And my mother's very,
How old is she?
all she
Isn't
does
she
is
like
stop.
too old to be doing this anymore?
Well, you would have thought so, wouldn't you? But she's in the mid-80s. My father, when I saw him last year, because I hadn't seen him for 40 years, I thought, I wonder if he's changed. He was, it was vile. I thought, I don't want him to touch me after what he'd done to me as a child. But how he looked at me and the things he said to me on his deathbed, I'm like, this man hasn't changed an iota. And here they are, going off to give account, for their lives, and yeah. Well, that's what psychopaths do, and narcissists. It's all about them. They have zero regard for anyone but themselves. So, as I said, my father thought he was clever being able to have sex with his children.
And your mom now, I mean, when you say that she's still involved and actively practices witchcraft, I mean, what type of witchcraft does she do that she's still coming after you? I can't actually imagine. I can imagine that when you're, well, the stories I've been told by other survivors as well, is that these things, it happens in the home, obviously as children where they're powerless and they are under their grasp. And yes, I think to an extent when they leave, but not to the point when you are actively still being hunted by your parents well into your 60s or in your 60s already. Your mother is like 86 years old and still trying to kill you. I've never in my life heard about attack. You're laughing.
Well, yeah, you would
not.
think they would get to the point and they would be like, they're over it, but that's how she thrives. As I said, my brother now has an AVO. I'm back with the police, looking at pressing more charges because I want to be left alone. The problem is I left Sydney and moved to a little country town to get away from them, and then they followed me here. So one lives 2 blocks that way and the other one lives 2 blocks that way. So she goes around town telling everyone what a horrible person I am. So I'll go out, yeah, and you just think, leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with you. So anyway, I've been seriously looking at whether to relocate, but I've got my business here. I got friends. Yeah, it's just, I'll see her in the street and she will just glare at me. But she's always plotting.
Wow.
So when I look at the psychology of my parents, and their behavior, it's like they need this constant drama, this constant trauma, particularly my mother, because she hasn't dealt with her stuff. And she is very involved in sex magic and everything like that. And so both of my parents were, sexually, no boundaries, if I could put it that way. But yeah, it's just like, I just want to be left alone. I don't want to see them again. I don't want to hear from them. And that's what I've said to the police. So, if all these new ones with the police stick, then hopefully that will, I thought the AVO would be a warning to say to them, I've had enough, just leave me alone. But, it's still going on. I got better things to do. I don't focus on it. I just get out there and, live my life the best I can. But yeah, it's.
Where does your sister?
Yeah.
Where does your sister fall into all of this? From what you've said, that you were 3 brothers, and you said the other one was physically Was he physically challenged in his
Yeah,
being, or was
so
that was on?
because of the incest, and I've tried to get DNA tests, and why I wanted to see my father on his deathbed was to get a DNA test to see whether he was actually my father or not. I proved that my mother was my mother, and she said to me, "Oh, you're disappointed, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, do you blame me?" But it's just, I just want to get on with my life and not have to deal with this crap. So my younger sister, she just said to me, she goes, "Doug, I don't remember anything from my childhood." But, she went through the same as the rest of us. I have memories of that. My mother told me things as well. There were things that happened to her where she had to go to hospital as a child as well. So, my father, had both my parents had no sexual boundaries, if I can put it that way. Everyone and anything was fair game. And, same with violence and that. It was, but that's the life of a typical cult person.
I honestly think you're being very kind when you speak about they didn't have sexual boundaries. That's a very polite way. That's a very polite way of putting it. I mean,
Well,
I
if,
can
if,
think
I,
of
if I
10
go
million
into
different
the
words.
gory details, you might get banned off YouTube.
Yeah, right. I'm like, Doug, okay, that's very sweet of you to say that. But anyway,
But
I mean, wow.
yeah, to get back onto the heterochromia and the iridologist.
Yeah.
So, I used to think, why would I have all these toxins in my system when I have such a clean diet? I was meticulous about my diet. Anyway, when I worked out what was going on now that she's not doing it, and I started detoxing, I went to another iridologist, and he said basically the toxins created a layer of a yellowy brown layer over the color of my eyes. And he said my eye color is actually naturally blue. It's not brown. And so as we've been detoxing through burdock, through dandelion, different things, I'm very much into herbalism and growing my own food. My eyes have now changed colour. So the outer rims of them are green and they're progressing to blue. And the inner part of it is hazel. So that means I have what's called central heterochromia. And so it means I have two colours in my eyes. Some people have one eye's one colour, the other eye's another colour. That's, I think, complete heterochromia. And then you've got sectoral getting my tongue tied, heterochromia, which is when you have little bits of colours in each. So for me, it's a journey. I often look in my eyes to see the level of toxins in my system, because I also have internal damage where food gets into my bloodstream. So as I started talking to Rachel and other survivors, we started noticing that most of us who come from a ritual satanic abuse background have heterochromia of one form or another. Like, it's an incredibly high number. It's like 80 to 90% of the survivors I know have this condition. So then as I've started researching the heterochromia and seeing, how does like sexual and psychological trauma, not trauma of the eye, but of the system, how does it affect the eyes? Then often it can affect the color of the eyes, because it affects the melanin in the system, which then determines your eye color. So with the cult, and you look at a lot of celebrities, an inordinately high number of celebrities have heterochromia as well, which tells you that they're quite likely from cult families too. And this comes back to the system of how the world is run, is that, if you're part of the cults, then, you're given positions of privilege as long as you stay in the system. My thing was I buck the system. So, we're starting to see all these trends in genetics, but for someone in a cult, they can look at you and go, oh, they got heterochromia. That can tell them a bit of what our history is. I know a lady who on her hand, she has the Star of David. That's how her veins are organized. And so she says people in the Masonic Lodge come up to her, and her family were in the Masons. They immediately recognize her because that's another genetic sign that they highly favour. So, they love genetics, they love experimentation, and they love people who have signs that say you're the cult. It's like, they have their handshakes and things.
Right. And that would be the heterochromia is often, I think that's what Rachel mentioned, is that often people have said to her that guys have walked, or people will walk up to them, look them straight in the eye, and then invite them to join or want them to join some type of dodgy society. And they would be able to see in your eyes, because not only from what I'm understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, not only is it coming from trauma, right? Is it obviously because we understand that. I also know that when you detox, your eyes do change. They become clearer, and possibly sometimes the eye color does change, yes, just from doing a normal detox. Not all the time, though, sometimes. No. But obviously with this, that would be a lot of toxins in your body. I mean, the trauma itself creates so many toxins in the body, right? Chemicals. Yep. But then also that trauma would lend itself to really expanding psychic and spiritual gifts, right? So they would absolutely traumatize the kids and weaponize their spiritual gifts against them. And that would also be part of seeing it in the heterochromia, right?
Yeah, well, and I went through this initiation. My father was insistent that I went through it. So at the age of 3, I was brutally raped as a way of forced disassociation and as a way to use me and my psyche to connect to the psychic realms. And so he was totally insistent I had to go through that. And he finished me off, if I can put it that way. But this was a ritual that I had to go through as part of our bloodline, and it was excruciating. But it was. I remember the look on his face. It was, and he was helped with other people. But so they use that, and I've always been incredibly psychic throughout my life because my body was never safe. So my issue is, often I don't feel pain and also pleasure because I'm disconnected from my body so much that I can cut myself and then I'll look down and there'll be blood pouring down my leg or something like that, and I go, and I know when I do hurt myself, I can sit there and I can analyze the pain. I can imagine it as a color. I can imagine it as a frequency. I can drop into it and feel it, or I can turn it off. So, that's now coming into the epigenetics, where because of the trauma I've been through and as a survival mechanism, because see, when we go into our survival mechanisms from trauma, that's when we don't change our DNA, but we change how we express our DNA and how we interpret and interact with our DNA. So that's why they love the trauma so much.
Explain that, please, if you don't mind. When you say you change the way you express your DNA, you don't change your DNA, but you change the way you express your DNA. Makes a lot of sense to me, but can you just clarify what you mean by that, please?
Well, the example I was giving then was with pain. So in terms of a normal person feels pain and goes, ouch, that hurts. But for me, and I've done a period, as I said, I've done a lot of modalities. At one period, I did the psychedelics. And when I was on the cactus, the peyote in San Pedro, it came to me and it said to me, you had so much pain in your life as a survival mechanism, you turned your life force down to 1 out of 10. So as a survival mechanism, I learned how to adjust my life force. And I learned how to turn my pain levels up and down, because if I wasn't able to do that, I would have been overwhelmed. So my DNA hasn't changed, but I've changed how I use my DNA, if I can put it that way. And sometimes we can have more than one set of DNA as well. And that's...
What do you mean by that? How can you have more than one? How can you have more than one set of DNA? Can you explain that?
Well, they found this when people were twins. And when you look at twins, we just assume they're both born. But often you can be twins in utero, but one of them dies very, very early in the embryo. It might only last for a week or a few months or something. But what happens is the twin that survives can absorb the DNA of the fetus of the twin that didn't survive. And so that twin that survived then has two sets of DNA. So we can have a set of DNA in our flesh, but another one in our blood, for example. And so some of the experiments they put me through when I was 5 at St. George Hospital, I went in there, they put me in a bath with another boy who was the same age as me, the same name as me. We were both called Doug, and we were meant to have the same operation. So, there are all these sorts of, and when I got out of hospital, my parents they never bought me anything, but I was given, of all things, a checkerboard chocolate. And, so again, it was, I'd gone through another ritual that was meant to be part of the bloodline.
Checkerboard chocolate. I mean, what do you mean checkerboard chocolate?
Well, what's one of the satanic symbols? It's a checkerboard.
Yeah,
the checkerboard floor.
What was it like? Okay, was it like a
Well, it was just like a chocolate in squares, but black, white, or brown, white, brown, white, brown, white, brown,
like the
checkerboard. Yeah. And as I said, my parents never bought me anything, even at things like birthdays and that, I'd watch the other kids getting gifts. Well, I got nothing. If I had anything I valued, my mother would destroy it. So, you start to look at, as you go on in life, when you reflect on things, rather than dismissing things, think, hang on a moment, that fits the pattern of behavior of, what they did. And they're the crumbs, like with Hansel and Gretel, that end up leading you to answers as to your past, if I can put it that way.
Explain to me, just go back to the scenario you were talking about in the bath, when you had another little boy who also called Doug and was having the same operation with you. What happened there when you were talking about absorbing a twin's DNA?
Well, I don't know
to do that sort of thing with you guys there?
I don't know exactly what happened in that operation. I mean, it was down in my genitals. They cut me quite extensively there, because I was obviously out of it. But it was just weird that they had another boy identical age to me sitting opposite me in this bath, and the nurse was attending to us. Again, you just say, what are the chances? I rang up the hospital and asked for my medical records fairly recently, and they said, no, we've just, it's standard procedure that we destroy them all. So I thought, okay. So I said, well, have you got my mother's records? They go, oh, yeah, they're all there. So I didn't say anything, like they're telling me it's standard procedure, they destroy them. And then they're telling, and I said, what can you tell me about my birth? So I started getting answers about my birth from my mother's records, and it turned out everything she told me about my birth was a lie. But then I got the point, I said, oh, can you tell me whether I was a twin or not? And by that time, they'd sort of tweaked and they said, sorry, we can't give you any more information. And that was the end of it. But there are a number of twins in my family. So I'm not saying I've gone through that, but all I'm saying is there is this incredible consistency of what I've gone through and how it's typical of bloodlines and cults. And on top of that, I've got, Rachel's my second cousin. I've got another friend in Sydney. She's an architect like me. She went to Sydney University. She's got the same cult background as mine. Her family came from the same clan in Scotland, in the Highlands of Scotland, who were associated with the Mcintyres and intermarried. So, as you meet more and more people who've gone through this, and when I talk with other survivors, we have such commonality of history. It's fascinating. They'll say things to me, oh, I went through this. I'm like, oh, I went through that too. So it's this, as we're starting to speak out, and meet each other, not only do we get a lot of validation from other survivors, but we also get a lot of answers. And so, you know, there are definite patterns to all of this. Yeah.
There was something I wanted to ask you. This is all, to me, it's just insane. I mean, and I know that just reading the comments in the chat as well, it's absolutely insane to hear what you've been through, Doug. And I can't say I'm sorry enough, because no one should have to go through that, you know, when you're just looking at the family scenario, you know, just what you went through in your family, as if that wasn't enough, you know, the continuation thereof and where you're at now. I'm trying to figure out, or try to understand, like, so if you have two sets of DNA, one in the blood, right, as well, how does that benefit you if you have two sets of DNA? Does it make any difference?
Sure. Yeah, well, I'm not. I haven't gone. I'm still learning as I'm going, because a lot of these things, you know, I've only started to understand and research in recent years. So I'm not sure why they're important to the cult and what benefit. I mean, they could be of benefit to them in terms of eluding, you know, not capture, but, you know, being held accountable for crimes. I don't know, but, you know, they're fascinating. Like, my mother used to say to me, she was always so jealous of my father because he knew how to hit me and not leave a mark. Whereas when my mother would hit me and send me to school, you know, I would be bashed and bruised from head to toe and all the kids would make fun of me. But back then, you know, you didn't get involved. You know, one of the teachers, you know, the deputy headmistress, who was lovely, she would take me into her office and I would sit there for the day and she would look after me, because I would be totally bashed to a pulp from my mother. You know, another time I turned up, my sister had stabbed me in the eye and I had stitches all the way down here. But as you can see, I have no scar. I put my hand on a broken glass bottle as a kid, cut all the way down through there. You can barely see the scar. You know, my fingerprints are starting to disappear. You know, a year ago, I almost sawed my finger off. The scar's rapidly disappearing. So there are things, and I've talked to other survivors who have the same. We heal up very, very, very quickly. And yeah, you know, it's why, you know, the cults are fascinated. You know, was someone saying cloning? Am I a clone? I don't think so.
I had the same feeling though, because we know that the cult is very fascinated with twins, the light twin and the dark twin, you know, and they do this thing. So I'm wondering, and that's exactly, I'd written it here, which is why I popped it up, Mama. Great minds think alike. And I was just wondering if that could be used for purposes of cloning and literally creating a dark twin.
Well, I've had a couple of experiences. Well, I've had at least 3 experiences in my life. Once I went to a bakery to get my lunch, and the woman looked at me and she said, "Oh my gosh, this guy just came in here who I swore was you." Another time, when I was doing a little bit of film work, a woman on set came up and started talking to me and saying, "I really enjoyed when we caught up last time." And I said, "I've never met you in my life." And then another time, someone came up to me and started going angry at me about why I didn't return their call. And I said, "I've never met you." So I've had at least, you know, is there another one of me? I hope
Probably.
not. But
my goodness, it wouldn't surprise me. It seriously would not surprise me.
Yeah, well, I don't want someone else running around out there, you know.
I agree. You know, my word. Wow, that's insane. I mean, that's absolutely insane. So also just getting back to the actors and the actresses in these superhero type roles. And I know
Yes.
Scarlett Johansson is one who does have
Yeah.
the heterochromia as well.
Yeah.
I
David
can't
Bowie's a
remember
very
who now.
famous one. Well, David Bowie's very
Yes.
famous. He's got two totally different coloured eyes. There's a whole list. If people Google it online, it comes up. There's a number of websites that will bring up 20 or 30 actors at least who have heterochromia. Now, it's also
So
worth. Yeah.
I just
I
want
was
to
going to say,
ask you about the celebrities. Sorry, do you
yeah,
think that now, because they've obviously had all this cult activity in their lives, they obviously have had their gifts weaponized to the nth degree.
yeah,
Do you think that what we think might be, I don't know, trick photography or something like that, right? Do you
yeah.
think that that's actually them acting out those superhero type roles in reality? What's your take on that?
Um, don't know. From a psychic point of view, I think people can. I mean, I don't know if anyone saw the movie Split, which is a very interesting movie when you look at this topic and how he has all the different personalities, and different personalities have different abilities. Like for me, I know, and I'm not a drinker, but if I go out and have something to drink, I remember one night I was out with friends. I'm a cheap drunk. I'd had a few drinks. I was walking down the street to go back to the car. I felt under threat. Instantly, I became sober. I switched to another personality in my system, and the alcohol doesn't affect it at all. So I have that ability. I can drive down a road that I've been 100 times, and if I choose to switch, it's like I've never been on that road in my life, and I'll see things that I've never seen. So I can look at someone I've known all my life, and then I can switch and look at them as though I've never met them, and their whole face changes because all my emotional connection layers are no longer there. So we have a lot of abilities like that, and we're different. We all don't have the same ones. I have
Right.
precognition. I know how to remote view. Most of us, like Rach, we're all psychic. I would always know things. Like with my kids, I remember going down the snow. We went snowboarding one year, and I said to my son, please, we need to watch Ellie. I think she's going to break her wrist this morning, but I don't want to say anything because I don't want to Jonah her. Half an hour later, she breaks her wrist. So we do have these crazy lives, but I can't jump from here and shoot up in the sky or things like that, but I have abilities that if I told people I had, they'd look at me like I was crazy and probably lock me up.
Would you not be able to project or shapeshift because with some of those abilities that maybe some of these celebrities have, which is probably why they would have been chosen for the roles, right? Because
Yep.
they would have those abilities would have been recognized by their handlers or abusers when they were teeny little tots already. So they would have been groomed throughout the years to actually fulfill the roles they're playing now. And they do it very well. I mean, let's face that,
Yeah, well, Anneke
So to me,
Lucas
it
talks
would,
about that. Yeah.
yeah.
Don't think I've seen someone shape shift. I do see spirits. I find that quite easy. They don't worry me. A lot of us who have trauma have a lot of issues with electronics. So I often fry the electronics in my cars. Sometimes I can't use a touch thing on my phone, or if I go to an ATM, it won't recognize my hands. If I have fights with people, and I'm fairly placid, but the few times where I've had a emotional disagreement with someone, the lights have started flashing, the radio had turned on and off, a cup on the shelf split in half, little things, but they're not like I can sit here and, make someone fly across the room or things like that. And in terms of probably the wildest thing I've heard of, and I won't name names of other survivors, some of them have had amputations of limbs that have grown back and things like that. So, yeah, but whether the
Yeah.
cults are much more
I've heard
advanced
that.
than that wouldn't
Definitely heard
surprise
that a
me.
few times.
Yeah. But, what they're doing in their laboratories and
I
things
think we've
like
been
that.
lied to about.
Yeah, I agree. We're lied to a lot.
Sorry, Doug, carry on. We've got a bit of a lag here, so just carry on. Sorry, I'm just going to let you talk.
Okay. Yeah, so, it often fascinates me as to how far they can push these abilities and how much they can traumatize. It's like as a child, some of the experiments, I remember one quite vividly because I'm working it through with my therapist at the moment. They would suffocate me to death and then resuscitate me and suffocate me to death and resuscitate, and they did that numerous times. And that caused huge ongoing issues with me through life where uncontrollable shaking. And as we're processing that, at least I'm not getting that trigger. But it was just the horror they put you through, all in the name of experimentation and trying to know how to manipulate and control the population.
And using children and animals, the most defenseless, really, those which need to be protected, the defenseless ones, the ones that don't have a voice, the ones that don't have the size or the muscles to protect themselves against these monsters. Those are the ones that have been the most vulnerable and the most, I cannot even begin to think what kind of karma these people are creating for themselves and have created for themselves. Because, karma is really cause and effect. You can't do things and expect that it's not going to come back. It is just the natural law, LORE, of the universe. So it doesn't matter what religion you believe in, it doesn't matter what faith you have. We live in this world and we are governed by natural laws. And if we break those laws, if we go against them, if we manipulate those energies and for purposes of controlling another and hurting something which is weaker than you or smaller than you, there's always a price to pay, and it comes
Totally.
back tenfold.
But when you're
absolutely.
When you're a narcissist, you block that out. Yeah. My mother says to me, she doesn't believe in life after death because if she did, she would be petrified of dying.
Well, she clearly is. She's 86 and still going strong, right? Doing her shenanigans. She's showing no signs of slowing down. But I bet you, if you really had to sit with her in just a room where everything is shut down for 12 hours, there's no music, there's no witchy stuff, there's no nothing. She's just got to sit and be with herself. Oh boy, we're going to see a very, very different picture and a very different side of her emerging, because then you're going to see her fears. And really, at the end of the day, no one escapes that. From lots of stories I've heard in the cult, they lie about what happens in hell. You get to party, you get to drink, you get to take drugs. The Vikings believe they go to Valhalla and they sit there and they just drink beer with each other all day. And then Freya walks in and they aren't even allowed to look at Freya. And I'm like, well, aren't you getting bored just drinking beer the whole day? Like, hey, I can do that for like half an hour maybe. What do you want to be doing, drinking beer the whole day with the rest of those smelly Vikings, right? But it's like, I think hell is absolutely the place where you're constantly searching for yourself. You're searching for light, you're searching for God, you're searching for power, you're searching for everything, and you think it exists outside of yourself. So you therefore have to do abominable things to get from another what you think you don't have inside of you. And that is the sad deception, because we're all created in the light of God. And the minute we strike that again, that comes to life. We are guided, we are shown how to reclaim that which is naturally ours.
yeah, look at all the people who've died and had near-death experiences and come back, and it's such a consistent message that we have a life review. We have to give account for what we've done. We feel all the pain and all the joy we've inflicted upon others, and we keep coming back to learn our lessons here until we do. And often the rapist might come back as a little girl and things like that. So that's, you
Tables are
can't,
turned. That's and that is why, I'm so happy you actually said that, Doug, when you talk about that, because in many instances that is misunderstood. Literally karma is cause and effect. And even though the body dies when we pass over, the spirit does not. And your soul / spirit and soul know exactly what you need to rectify. You can hide from those evils for so long. You can avoid coming back and facing them. And really, that's what reincarnation is. Reincarnation is being caught up in the matrix of reincarnation until you've understood all the lessons of the lower rung energies, the ones that we create all this nonsense until we move. It's like the chakra system. It's getting caught in the lower 3 chakras, the lower triad, as we call it, the money, power, greed, sex, everything there. And we get caught up in that swamp. And then when we get out of it, we move into the heart, which is the first non-tangible element, which is trust. It's air, right? So now we start opening up the heart, but you cannot get there unless you've understood what has to be healed and transformed in the lower part of our human nature. We all have that. We've all been there. We all have a lower part of human nature. So I think I feel so bad for people like your mom. I really do. And your dad and so many others who believe that this is the way to get ahead, is by lying, deceiving, hurting, cheating, manipulating.
As I would watch them through my life, and I've seen this with other people, is every time you do something bad, you diminish your soul a little bit more, to the point where, like, my parents were basically numb to doing good. But what saved me through it all was my connection to my guides, and how they always kept me on the straight and narrow. And they said, if you say a little lie that gets bigger and bigger, you're going to end up down this path that's not going to be good. So you need to keep, they've kept me on a short leash. Despite everything I've gone through, for most of my life, I have felt totally loved by God and the universe. And I think that's what's really, really saved me, because in my, I've had some pretty dark days, and, I was programmed to kill myself and all sorts of things like that. So I've had to face myself, but I'm very comfortable. I lived in the middle of the bush for 5 years off grid, which was brilliant for me, because I was away from people and I could heal. I've talked to my mother about the afterlife, Janice. I was a minister in the church for a period, and she just said she doesn't believe any of that exists. We're just matter, and once we die, that's the end of it. And that's her coping mechanism for saying, she doesn't want to deal with the consequences of her actions. But we do. Right. I mean, when my father died, I know, because part of my psychic thing, I've talked to him and he's come to me since he's died, is that he's now having to deal with all the wrong that he did in this life. And some souls do so much wrong that basically their souls are broken up and dispersed into, new people,
that's very interesting you should say that, because what Creator Source gave to me around that was that they literally go back to the beginning of life form, like a little blade of grass, a grain of sand, so it's learning the beginning of life force again and life form, because that's how it begins. And then you get that opportunity again. And I think, that is really our creator God actually perfects the universe is through us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, one thing I realized recently is all of our experiences are eternal, but all the objects are transient. So it's the opposite. So we take all of our memories with us on our eternal journey, but we put so much effort into the things around us. But in 100 years' time, my body and most things around me here might be dust, but my consciousness will still be there. So it's our consciousness that we take with us.
Absolutely, I fully agree with that. And your consciousness remains, and that's what I say. So when we come to the place where you can't move forward anymore until you face that which has been holding you back, in other words, the evils you've done, the dark deeds you've perpetuated against others, you can only hide from that for so long, and then sooner or later, your own soul knows it has to go back and right its wrongs. That's what karma is. So you then will choose an experience where, if you were a rapist in a past life or a past experience, you now get to experience what it is to be on the receiving end of that. And that's I want to say that very, very carefully. It does not mean that anyone who's had that experience was that. Okay. We've got to practice a lot of discernment when dealing with these things. I mean, Doug, you and I are talking masterclass here. Okay. This is masterclass stuff. Right. So you've got to have an understanding.
Sometimes people have said to me, "Oh, is this karma? Have you had this life because it's what you've done in another life?" And I've dropped in and asked my guides, and I don't sense that. What I sense my journey in this life is to learn unconditional love and to love even those who want the worst for me.
Exactly. And for you, and I love that for you, because you are so true to that purpose. That's what your purpose was, your sacred contract with our Creator when you came in here, that no matter how many evils are perpetuated against you, you will still come out radiating love and be the biggest teacher for love. And you will show the world what love is and how love conquers all. And I love that in you survivors, because I see another one who I see who's overcome that is Joanne Breeze. Another one I see who's overcome that is Rachel Vaughan. I've seen, and I could mention a few, but they probably, I don't know, maybe don't want to, I don't know if they want me to mention their names, so I'd rather not. But these are just the ones that I've worked with, that I've seen, and that have absolutely come through hell and literally are here to share love and have no desire to hurt anyone. They've been subjected to the worst kind of sociopathic, psychopathic, narcissistic, psychotic abuse ever. And yeah, you guys still are. I honor you, man. I really, really, really do.
Thank you.
There are a few people that can move through that in the spirit of forgiveness. And forgiveness really is understanding. It's understanding. When you understand things, forgiveness naturally occurs of itself. We place so much emphasis on forgiving, and so many people make that forgiveness about the other person, when it really is about understanding your spirit, your creation, your sacred contract, I want to call it that, with God, with each other. And your spirit is truly to show love. And thank you for that. Really, thank you.
Well, I always love the quote, Chantelle, that says, "To forgive is to set the captive free, and then to realize the captive is you."
Exactly.
Because
and the other person is mirroring that. They just mirror that for you. So don't hate the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger.
But we can't escape ourselves. We can try to, but I found I took my issues with me wherever I went, so I had to face myself. And particularly when I lived on the farm by myself for 5 years, no electricity, no water, nothing, I sat there and I had to face myself. And that's such an important thing. And I had to ask, what was my life contract? What did I come here for? Thanks, Joanne.
Absolutely. I got to get you Aussies on a round table soon. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. You guys are so cool. I got to tell you, you guys are so brave and so inspiring. And you do such amazing things in Australia. And you really are up against the beast there. You really are. But we're all on your team. And that's for sure. All of us here are definitely Team Australia.
All in it together.
So,
yeah. There's a lot more survivors speaking up here, Chantelle. A lot more of them are getting strong enough to come forward. And so I'm hoping that the army will build stronger and stronger and get the point where the authorities can't, stop us anymore.
Absolutely. It's coming, Doug. It's already there. If we think about it, they're still trying to do their dodgy things. And they're going to try for a while because, and they won't do it on their own. They come up against you as a system, right? So they're cowards, really, at the end of the day. And that is why when we just one by one take off the lid, just one lid at a time, and every little lid is a candle that gets lit, right? Yeah. They can't blow out that fire eventually. They've been raging war on Australia with the fires and on the kangaroos and stuff with all those fires they've been starting over recent years. But I think let's turn that around. We're going to turn that on them, but we're going to do it spiritually. We're going to turn those fires into spiritual fires. And we're going to ignite whatever we need to ignite, and they are just going to dissolve and transform and go back to God in fire form, and Creator Source can deal with them. That's my opinion. And whatever needs to be, for me, that's really what it is. Every person who wakes up is like a candle. And bring all those candles together, we're going to get the best bonfire ever, right? That's the way I see it.
Yeah. Well, it feels like it's happening. I watch consciousness, and things are moving faster and faster. And even now, I'm finally starting to get support from the police, and support services and different things like that. So I'm, after all my life being ridiculed and mocked and targeted, I'm now starting to get some action on my side, which is really, really good. And people are saying to me that things are changing and happening here.
Doug, I'm so happy, and that could not happen without you guys. And I mean, another one as well that I've had on the show, was Fiona a couple of years ago, Fiona Barnett. And I know she was one of the original, if not the original whistleblower in Australia. It must be at least 15 years ago.
She was born at the same hospital as I was.
Oh, wow. Well, there you go, right? There you go. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. But she was a warrior for speaking up, being the first one.
Absolutely. And I remember the amount of crap she took. She was I remember the first time I heard about child hunting was from one of Fiona Barnett's blogs. And I was like, what? And she was talking about the child hunting at these lodges. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Bohemian Grove. But it was just something insane for me. So she was the first one many years ago, who spoke up about this. And then, of course, when I started the channel, it was with Jessie Zabotar. But, and since then, I don't know how many survivors have spoken up. And all the survivors out there know you're welcome on this channel. You definitely are welcome to share your story here. Doug, I'm definitely going to have you on again. I think there's so much that we could talk about around these topics. And I love the idea of doing an Australian roundtable with Joanne, Doug, Rachel. Who's the other Australian? Joanne, Doug, Rachel. Who's the other Australian?
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, no, just the ones that I work with like now. But we'll get it on. I mean, and definitely we would talk about what's happening in Australia. Oh, Kerry Saint was also the other one who's done so much stuff for the adoptions. You know, she's been such a fantastic advocate for the forced adoptions in Australia as well, and brought so much attention to that. So we're definitely going to give a wonderful focus on Australia in the future, the near future, and definitely have you back talking about.
If you want to talk about the Nugan Hand Bank sometime, because there's a number of really good books written on that and other books written on the CIA in Australia. So there's some really good topics out there where people can read them and see that there's extensive research done on these things.
Exactly. Well, I'll definitely talk about that because we can definitely look into that, and I can just post everyone the links before, so we can actually all have a little bit of insight. Adrian John Wells, do you know him?
No.
In Australia.
No, who is he?
Okay, he's very much one of the guys from Australia that's spoken up as well. His father was the head of the mining unions there, and they assassinated him when he was 3. And then Adrian has been on the run, and they trafficked him through the Reagan administration, actually. And now my last interview with him shows how they're still targeting him hugely to this day because of his bloodlines, because his inheritance, really, because of what he stands to inherit, and which of the celebrities are actually stealing that, like stealing his inheritance. And his bloodlines. It's insane. It's insane what they're doing in Australia. It really is.
I'll have
really,
to
really,
look him
really
up.
is.
Yeah, I've met a couple of men recently who have gone through similar, or about 3 of them in the last year, because I've been starting to do talks around Sydney, and people have been coming up to me and saying, "Well, I've gone through this as well," and so there's quite a few people out there who've experienced it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Doug, I want to say thank you so much for joining me today. What another eye-opening conversation. And I really actually have been sitting here and want to pinch myself for laughing at the beginning of the show, but I'm sorry, it was so ludicrous.
Oh, don't worry.
Stop it. You see, you're going to make me laugh again.
But it's a way. The reason we do it is sometimes things are so horrific that we laugh because it's as I said, I used to do it a lot when I was younger because people would look at me and I'd say, because it's so hard to take it in that this stuff really, really goes on, because you just sit there, but then later on you sit and process it and it hits you. But it's actually a normal psychological reaction. You know,
I mean, to think that one day your mother just crushes up glass and puts it in Dad's food and his bolognese, and then he gets a little bit pissed off because he's realized now she's trying to do something, and then I'll just crush up sleeping tablets and give them to her, and then he'll just push her out the window, and she'll just hit him with a pole over the head.
and meanwhile, you got 4 little terribly traumatized children watching all of this. Yes, standing there bawling our eyes out. Sorry?
And not only bawling their eyes out, but themselves victims of attempted murder.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah, there's so many things I haven't told you, but after the age of 10, because you can't give testimony, after the age of 10, because you can give a testimony as a child, you're legally liable. So once I turned 10, my parents repeatedly tried to kill my brother and I because we were, a threat to them. So there's a whole pile of things, just life. Sometimes I sit there and,
I mean, and the fact that, I can imagine actually that must be something. As 2 brothers that have experienced that through childhood, or 4 brothers, where your parents are literally trying to kill you, that must be of course, very traumatizing. Not only are they not keeping you safe, it's one thing when your parents are not keeping you safe from a predator or something, because their eyes are shut. But it's another thing when they are actively hunting you. So, what effect does?
I grew up with, I hated my parents as a child because of what they put me through. Absolutely despise them. But they didn't care. Even my mother still doesn't care. It's just all about getting back at people. It's all about, but the day that they took me to the beach and dropped me in the surf and, in the rip, and the beaches were all closed, no swimming. I couldn't swim. I'm dog paddling like this, getting smashed around by the waves and getting plunged underneath. And, they're just watching me go, it wasn't fun.
And then a lifeguard saved you. Who saved you? Because they're standing there watching you drown.
Yeah, just a lone surfer, a young guy walking along the beach, came out, put me on his surfboard. The one mate picked me up and just plunged me down. I remember my lungs were burning so bad because I needed air. I don't know how both of us ended up being dumped on the beach. He was throwing up everywhere, so both of us almost died. My mother came up and told me off and then dragged me back to the thing, popped me in the car and took me home. I didn't go to a doctor, nothing. They were upset. This was meant to be their plan to get rid of me. You ask Rachel. Rachel and I laugh a lot about how often our parents tried to kill us, and then every time they tried to, something would happen. That's why she's so pissed off now.
So how that must have bonded you brothers though a lot, or either split you apart, made you really play one up against the other because now nothing was safe, right? So, and of course, parents are in control. So you're either winning favor with parents or trying to win favor with parents, right? Or you glue together like four little soldiers who've got each other's backs all the time.
No, well, I was excluded from the family. So I was purposely and willfully by my parents made to feel that I wasn't part of that family. So I would come home, particularly after my parents got divorced, I would come home and my brother would keep the other three kids close, and I would be purposely not part of them at all. My older brother, when we were growing up, he would bash me to a pulp. And he was the best fighter at his school. And I hated violence with a vengeance because of the amount of violence at home. But he had a rule that if someone picked me and I didn't fight them, then I'd have to fight him. So it didn't matter where I turned, there was violence. And guys at school, because my brother was a good fighter, would think that they could pick me. So they would come up and I'd say, stop, I don't want it, stop, stop. And if they did it a third time, I'd flatten them. So, but yeah, it was just, even as an adult, my mother, if I needed any help, I had to pay her an hourly rate to come around and help me, so it was just, but when Rick and I moved in together for that brief 9 months before he died, that was probably the only nice time I had in my life with anyone in my family. And then they killed him.
Did you and him actually talk? Were you bonding? Did you bond after that during those 9 months before he passed
got on
away?
really well, but we didn't talk about the past because he was very close to my mother, and Rick was very much in keeping the peace, whereas I would stand up to my father and my mother as a little kid and I would scream at them, and usually that would be life-threatening. One day I stood up to my father and told him to F off because I just couldn't take it anymore. And he picked up a brick and threw it straight at my face. And I ducked just in time. Luckily it didn't hit me at all. And I had to run for my life, get underneath the house, which was quite low. And he tried to come in underneath me to get me. And he couldn't, so he got the hose and tried to hose me out. And so I sat up right up in the back corner in the dirt and the spiders just crying. and I had to wait till he got drunk and passed out, and then I disappeared for the day. So there were lots of experiences like that. It wasn't a happy childhood, but I was never, ever included in that family. It was, and now, I still don't have them. And during my life, when I've tried to connect with them and I've helped them out a lot, I've tried to do as much nice things as I could to them, but all the good was always repaid with evil. So, now I'm happy that I've let them go, never reconnecting again.
I'm wondering if there's I'm interested because it's something I've thought about as well. And it was something I remember when I was interviewing Tom Althouse, who's the author of The Matrix, the screenwriter.
Yeah.
He had a similar type of programming where he was the black sheep,
Yeah.
and I saw Mama put that up there now, and I was actually thinking about it as well, because I've heard about this a couple of times where one child really is scapegoated. So I'm wondering if there is a type of programming that they use, which is like literally the black sheep programming, where one child is isolated. I mean, I would definitely say I'm the black sheep of my family, but it wasn't programmed that way. There was no programming. It was just because I was irritated by all of them all of the time. I mean, that wasn't there. That was just me. Okay, I've accepted that now. But I'm like thinking, in this type of thing, is there any type of programming like that would maybe be the black sheep programming of the family, where you are ousted and you are subjected to that type of ostracization, I think is the word.
Yeah. Well, it wouldn't surprise me if both my parents, because of the MK Ultra connection, whether they were programmed to be Manchurian candidates. So my father killed quite a number of people, and the police have never held him to account for any of those crimes, and rapes and bashings and pedophilia and everything, and they always protected him. But my parents are what I would say a typical 100% Manchurian candidates. And they can go and do. My father could kill someone, and then 5 seconds later, it would be as though nothing had happened. And if you said to him, "You just killed someone," he'd go, "No, I didn't." So their level of Manchurian candidateness was extreme. But I always saw myself as the white sheep in a black sheep family. So I would go to school, I would excel at school, my teachers loved me, my friends' parents loved me. I'd try and stay at friends' places whenever I could, only after my father had gone, because he would never let me do anything. And, my mother went to parent-teacher night once, I think it was, and she came home furious because I'd done so well at school, and I was punished for that. And if I tried to study or do anything, my parents would always make sure that they would circumvent, anything good in my life. But anyway, I managed to succeed, managed to get into uni. I never got a cent, never got any help from them. So it was just, yeah. But I had lovely teachers which were good, who could see what was going on, even though they didn't intervene. At times they would take me and I'd stay at their places and things like that, just to get away from all the mayhem.
Well, I thank God that you're here.
Well,
thank you for coming to the earth at this time, and for being as brave as what you are, because my gosh, that really requires bravery to live the life that you've lived. And for sharing, I love you, Aussies there. I think you're doing amazing work there in Australia. And I look forward to sharing more of your story and your journey, Doug, and everything that you're doing there. So thank you so much.
Really
I know I try
appreciate
to
it.
end
Thank
this
you.
out. Yeah, no worries, man.
Thank you
The
for
next time
giving me
we're
a
kicking your
platform.
ass at rugby. Okay, we're kicking your ass at rugby. So the next Australia-South African game.
I know.
The next South Africa-Australia game.
I used to play rugby. I was hooker.
My son was eighth man. Number 8,
Okay.
eighth man, I think is 8. Right, yeah. My son was number 8. Yeah, he also
Okay,
played.
so
He also
you're
played
talking about,
competitive rugby.
yeah, but you're talking about union, are you, not league?
What, the rugby?
Yeah.
Well, so
I
what is
think
the difference between union and league?
well, in rugby league you have scrums. You know, where I was hooker, I put my arms over
Yes.
the props and I have to get the ball with my feet. In union, if you get the ball and they touch you,
Yes.
the whole teams jump on top of you.
Okay,
So
but
you got
that's where the
to
guys
make,
pull up their pants to this high. There's where they wear those really, really high rugby, those little shorts that they pull up to under their armpits.
oh,
We
do
don't
they?
like that. We don't like those.
Notice that doesn't sound very attractive.
No, it's not. Please tell them they've got to change their uniform. You know, when they come and play rugby against South Africa, that's the uniform we deal with here. Okay, not the other one
Yeah.
where the pants are pulled up here.
Well, I tell my
I think
friends
that's the one
who,
where they're not allowed to scrum.
well, I tell them they're all. I tell my friends who are masculine and into sport. I go, it's just soft gay porn. All you're doing is watching good-looking
Totally.
guys run around. They don't like
And,
it.
and it's and especially if you're a rugby player, you got your head in other guys' backsides, you're like grabbing them around the legs, and
Yeah,
there's nothing
exactly.
more intimate than rugby. Seriously,
Yeah,
let's get real here.
yeah, totally.
Ah, funny. Okay, guys. On that note, Doug, go watch your rugby and tell those guys are going to change their uniforms, please. Please just give different shorts. That's all. Please just wear different shorts. Everything else is fine. Okay, guys. You all take care there on the. Just take care of yourselves on those spicy, hot spiritual streets right now, right? There's so much sassiness going on there. Take care, practice discernment, and as always, live your life like it's golden. Why? Because it is.